the most important part of the headline isn't open. It's the phrase attached to it, for the remaining period of the ceasefire. According to Al Jazeera's live coverage, the Strait of Hormuz is open, but only inside a time box. And when a choke point that carries a major share of the world's energy flows is described like a temporary permission slip, that is not reassurance. That is leverage. Because open in normal language means stable. Open for the remaining period means conditional. It means the sea lane is being treated like a switch that can be flipped based on politics, not weather. And the moment shipping companies, insurers, commodity traders, and navies hear conditional, they don't relax. They start planning for the day the condition expires. Here's what most people miss. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just a body of water, it's a compression point. It forces an enormous amount of global commerce, especially energy, through a narrow corridor with limited alternatives. Widely cited estimates put roughly 1/5 of globally traded oil moving through that route in normal conditions, along with LNG shipments and broader commercial traffic. That doesn't mean every disruption becomes a catastrophe. It means the system is sensitive to perceived risk, because even small friction in a choke point can cascade into delays, higher freight costs, and price spikes. Now, look at the timing signal embedded in the headline. A ceasefire is, by definition, a pause that can hold or collapse. So when officials or state-linked messaging emphasizes the strait will remain open only for the ceasefire window, they're telling you something very specific. The strait is part of the negotiation. It is not merely protected by the ceasefire, it is being managed as a bargaining chip inside it. That is how modern conflicts apply pressure without firing a shot, by turning stability itself into a controlled resource. Keeping the strait open becomes a benefit that can be granted, extended, tightened, or withdrawn. And if you think that sounds abstract, remember what actually moves markets. Not explosions, expectations. The expectation that Hormuz could be treated as a conditional corridor is enough to raise a risk premium immediately. This is also why you should be cautious about taking comfort in the word ceasefire. Ceasefires don't end conflicts, they change the tempo. They create a pause where both sides test each other, reposition, shape narratives, and decide whether the next phase will be diplomacy or escalation. So when the strait is open for the remaining period, the real question becomes, what happens when the remaining period ends? Because that's the moment the world discovers whether this was a step towards stabilization or a controlled pause before renewed coercion. And that's the frame for this briefing. I'm going to explain why that wording matters, how maritime choke points become political weapons, what signals to watch while the ceasefire clock runs down, and the 3 most likely ways this open for now situation can break, quietly, gradually, or all at once. Let's translate the phrase open for the remaining period of the ceasefire into what it means operationally, because this is where the story becomes much bigger than a shipping update. In maritime security, there are 3 layers of open. There's legal openness, ships are not formally prohibited; practical openness, ships can move without disruption; and commercial openness, insurers will cover it at a price that makes the trip viable. You can have the first without the second, and you can have the second without the third. A strait can be open on paper and still function like it's partially closed if enough ships decide the risk and cost aren't worth it. That's why the best indicator isn't a spokesperson saying it's open. The best indicator is whether shipping behavior returns to normal. Steady transits, stable insurance rates, predictable routing, and no clustering of vessels and holding patterns outside the corridor. Because in a choke point, behavior changes first. Statements catch up later. Now, why attach Hormuz to the ceasefire at all? Because it signals conditional control. It tells the other side and the global audience, we can keep the world's commerce moving as long as the political environment stays inside the box we accept. That can be deterrence or it can be coercion, depending on what else is being demanded behind the scenes. It also creates a subtle but powerful narrative advantage. If the ceasefire collapses and shipping is disrupted afterward, the side making the statement can frame it as, we kept it open during the ceasefire. The disruption happened because the ceasefire ended. That shifts blame outward. It turns maritime stability into proof of responsibility, and maritime disruption into proof of the other side's recklessness. That's not just PR. Blame matters because it shapes coalition support, sanctions politics, escort operations, and the willingness of third parties to intervene diplomatically. There's a second layer here, deterrence messaging to markets. When a conflict has already pushed fear into energy and shipping markets, sometimes the fastest way to cool prices is to project controlled restraint, especially around choke points. But notice what this headline does. It offers restraint, then puts an expiration date on it. That can calm markets briefly while still preserving the threat. It says, not today, but don't get comfortable. And that's where the real leverage appears. A conditional openness regime pressures everyone with a stake in the strait. importers, shipping firms, insurers, and allied governments to work the problem during the ceasefire, not after it. It compresses decision-making. It creates urgency without requiring immediate escalation. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is so strategically useful as a bargaining chip. It's not just a route, it's a confidence engine for the global economy. If confidence holds, trade flows. If confidence breaks, trade hesitates. And hesitation is expensive in ways that show up fast. Fuel prices, freight rates, supply chain delays, and political pressure in capitals that would prefer to stay out of the conflict. So when you see open for the remaining period, don't read it as a safety guarantee. Read it as a statement of conditional stability. Conditional stability is not peace, it's managed risk. And managed risk can flip to unmanaged risk the moment the condition changes. Now let's get to the real decision points, because the future of this ceasefire window isn't a mystery. It's a set of plausible paths, and each path has clear tells. Path 1, the ceasefire extends, and Hormuz becomes a bargaining anchor. In this scenario, the remaining period language is a pressure tool designed to keep everyone focused on extending the pause. The strait stays open not because the conflict is solved, but because both sides decide the costs of disruption are too high right now. You'll see quieter rhetoric, more technical, diplomatic language, and a gradual normalization of shipping insurance pricing. Not a return to perfect normal, but a drop from panic to cautious routine. Path 2. The ceasefire holds, but maritime risk quietly increases anyway. This is the scenario people underestimate because it doesn't look dramatic. Open continues to be said publicly, but commercially, the corridor behaves like it's tightening. Advisory warnings increase, premiums creep upward, ships choose daylight transits, convoys or escorts become more common, and any small incident triggers disproportionate reaction. The strait is technically open, but it's running on elevated friction. This is how you keep leverage without declaring closure. Path 3. The ceasefire breaks, or is judged to be broken, and the strait becomes the escalation stage. This is the snap risk scenario. When the pause collapses, the conditional promise ends, and the choke point becomes the most efficient place to apply pressure fast. Not necessarily through a single massive event, but through enough perceived danger that commercial traffic slows or reroutes. You don't need total shutdown to create global consequences. In a choke point, partial disruption can be enough to spike risk premiums sharply. Now here's the part competitor-style channels often hint at, and it's worth saying carefully. The most dangerous phase is the transition moment, the moment the ceasefire ends or the moment one side claims the other violated it. Because that's when rules get ambiguous. Ambiguity at sea is how miscalculations happen. One side interprets a maneuver as aggression, the other interprets a warning as provocation. Then you get an incident that forces public response. So, what can realistically be achieved during the ceasefire window to prevent that? Not a grand peace settlement. The realistic objective is mechanisms, deconfliction channels, rules of the road, agreed corridors, or indirect guarantees that reduce the chance of an irreversible accident. This is the kind of progress that doesn't look impressive in headlines, but it's the difference between a tense pause and a dangerous cliff. There's also a global timing problem embedded in this. The world economy doesn't wait for diplomacy. If the market starts pricing Hormuz as a switch that can be flipped at the end of a ceasefire, then even open today won't fully calm risk. Because pricing is forward-looking. The question market's price isn't, is it open? The question is, will it still be open when the ceasefire expires? That's why the next phase of the story will be decided less by official statements and more by behavior. Shipping traffic patterns, insurance language, naval posture messaging, and whether intermediaries start talking about extensions, frameworks, and technical discussions, instead of warnings and consequences. Here's what you should watch, specifically, while the ceasefire clock runs down. Because these indicators will tell you whether the strait is heading towards stabilization or being held as a loaded option. First, watch commercial behavior. Are tankers and cargo ships transiting normally, or are they bunching up outside the corridor? Are there signs of rerouting? Are shipping schedules quietly being adjusted? These are the earliest tells because commercial actors move based on risk, not rhetoric. Second, watch insurance and advisory language. You don't need insider access. Maritime risk advisories and insurance chatter often change tone before governments change policy. When the language shifts from elevated caution to avoidance recommended, that's a sign the corridor is effectively tightening even if officials say it's open. Third, watch naval posture and escort signaling. Increased escort coordination, more visible patrol messaging, or changes in public security corridor language can mean two things. Either a stabilizing effort is underway, or both sides are preparing for the ceasefire to end. The difference is whether posture is paired with deconfliction signals or paired with escalation rhetoric. Fourth, watch diplomatic intermediaries. When a ceasefire is likely to extend, intermediaries begin to sound procedural. Channels are open, technical teams, framework discussions, When a ceasefire is likely to fail, language becomes absolutist. No extensions, red lines, will respond. Now connect that back to the headline's core message. The strait is open for now. That's not simply an update. It's a reminder that stability is conditional. Conditional stability is designed to produce urgency. It tells every stakeholder, especially those who depend on energy flows, that the time to lock in a safer outcome is inside the ceasefire window, not after it. Because if the ceasefire ends without a mechanism to prevent accidents and manage pressure, then the strait doesn't need to be closed to become dangerous. It only needs to become uncertain. Uncertainty is the weapon that makes ships hesitate, insurers spike prices, and governments rush into emergency planning. So here's the real question under this headline. Is Hormuz being kept open as a gesture of restraint or as a timed lever? The wording strongly suggests it's a lever. And when choke points become levers, the world economy becomes part of the battlefield.